But there is an added technique for weakening a nation at its very roots, for disrupting the entire pattern of life of a people. And it's important that we understand it. The method is simple. First, discord, the dissemination of discord. A group not too large, a group that may be sectional or racial or political, is encouraged to exploit its prejudices through false slogans and emotional appeals. The aim of those who deliberately egg on these groups is to create confusion of counsel, public indecision, political paralysis, and eventually a state of panic. Sound national policies come to be viewed with a new and unreasoning skepticism, not through the wholesome political debates of honest and free men, but through the clever schemes of foreign agents. As a result of these new techniques, armament programs may be dangerously delayed. Singleness of national purpose may be undermined. Men can lose confidence in each other, and therefore lose confidence in the efficacy of their own united action. Faith and courage can yield to doubt and fear. The unity of the state can be so sapped that its strength is destroyed. All this is no idle dream. It has happened time after time in nation after nation during the last 2 years. Fortunately, American men and women are not yet easy dupes. Campaigns of group hatred or class struggle have never made much headway among us and are not making headway now. But new forces are being unleashed. Deliberately planned propagandas to divide and weaken us in the face of danger as other nations have been weakened before. These dividing forces I do not hesitate to call undiluted poison. They must not be allowed to spread in the New World as they have in the Old. Our moral, our mental defenses must be raised up as never before against those who would cast a smokescreen across our vision.
That was President Franklin D. Roosevelt shortly before the U.S. entry into World War II in May of 1940 during one of his famous fireside chats. And he is describing the situation that we find ourselves in today, where there are foreign influences that wish to divide us into racial or secular or various different little boxes that separate us as a people, that prevent us from uniting and becoming America as a whole. And these people are working hard to make sure that America remains divided and unable to be the superpower that it truly is when we work together. Welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you for joining me today. Glad to have you here. And I do appreciate you guys stopping in. I do like occasionally having some of those videos where I find some historical video, or in this case, audio from, like in this case, Franklin Roosevelt's fireside chats, that I think has turned out to be pretty darn prescient for today, very much applicable to how things are in this day and age. Hi, Jerry. Thank you for coming aboard. Glad to have you here. And so if you appreciate those, just let me know in the chat as well, because it does take a little bit of time sometimes to find that, and it is just a little bit of it's a little more effort. I want to see if you guys think it's worth it for when I can find that. And welcome, Lucille. Thank you very much. Glad to have you here. And it is absolutely true. And this is 1940 that he was talking about the Americans not being easily duped. How much have we changed from that era right before World War II? How more vulnerable are we in our modern age of instant information, instant technology, abilities to communicate around the world? As they say, a lie goes around the world before the truth gets a chance to put on its pants. And that is the day and age we're in, where you can literally see people who are convinced of falsehoods moments after those falsehoods are published. That information is going, and they are truly, and it's truly duping those who should be resistant to this. But that's because we're no longer unified. Hi, Robbie. Glad to have you on board. Do you mind if I share part of your email? Let me know in the comments. I'm about to do a little bit on Tucker Carlson here in just a moment. So if I can share some of your thoughts, I would appreciate that as well. These historical insights, it's amazing to me how much we can see in history, we can see today. And that's ironic because a lot of what Vladimir Putin said to Tucker Carlson is exactly that principle. He considers himself a historian of note. And Vladimir Putin certainly believes that if you look at history, you find what's going to happen today. While I can certainly see his point, I think that it's more likely that the arc of time rhymes. It may not be exactly the same, but often we can find hints about what happened in the past that will help us to determine where our future is going and how we just might be able to stop the bad things from happening. Thank you, Robbie. I will be talking about that in just a moment. As you can tell, I'm already talking about the situation, the interview between Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin. So let's go ahead and bring on some of the information that we have available here. We'll start with the Institute for the Study of War. They've gone through the interview and given their thoughts on it, and we'll touch on quite a bit in here. Russian President Vladimir Putin attempted to use an interview with American media personality Tucker Carlson, published on February 8th, to present a wider Western audience a long-standing Kremlin information operation that falsely asserts that Russia is interested in a negotiated end to its war in Ukraine. Putin illustrated throughout the interview that Russia has no interest in meaningful or legitimate negotiations. However, and that Putin still seeks to destroy Ukraine as a state. Putin also displayed his overarching hostility towards the West and falsely accused the West of forcing Russia to attack Ukraine. And I'm going to pause there for just a moment and talk for just a moment on that, because I took a couple of just vague notes as I watched that interview today. And by the way, if you do watch it, I recommend you watch it at about 1.75 times speed, because the pauses for the translator are long. And you'll find that I think overall the pace of it works a lot faster, better that way, unless you're going to slow it down for specific parts. So, Putin has said that it's the West's fault that Russia was forced to attack Ukraine. But Vladimir Putin also went back to World War II, and this is one of the points I want to point out where historical revisionism is thick in Vladimir Putin's speech or his conversation with Tucker Carlson. And I'm going specifically back to World War II. Vladimir Putin literally blamed Poland. He said that Poland was not willing to go along with Germany's plans, and therefore Germany was forced to invade by Poland and take over the country. Not only does this whitewash the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact that was going on at the time, not only does it whitewash Russia's role in the attack and dismantling of Poland in the early stages of World War II, but it literally blames the victim for that attack. So, taking that into account, understand that any history that you do see in that will be absolutely painted in the most favorable possible light Russia and to Vladimir Putin himself. So when you watch that, keep that in mind. I actually did find it to be an interesting listen, mainly because I found that Putin's public thought process, because understand, I believe this was entirely an operation on his part to try and paint a picture both for his people and potentially for the West. But from his public perspective, he's trying to create this persona, this scholarly persona, that everything that's happening in Ukraine was predicted effectively by over 1,200 years of history. I think it was 1,400 actually. No, 1,200. I had it right the first time. And that the situation in Ukraine was basically was seen in the cards. It had to happen, all because of his interpretation of history. Now, if you watch that interview as well, here are my other thoughts, and I'll just kind of quickly talk about them before I move on to other people's thoughts on it, and then get to Robbie Russell's thoughts as well. For one thing, I noticed that Tucker Carlson was controlled by Vladimir Putin, not in the classic sense of forcing him to do things, but the way the interview was steered very specifically in ways that clearly puzzled Tucker Carlson, threw him off his game. At one point in time, he actually says to Tucker Carlson, in almost a mocking tone, "You even applied for to work at the CIA and were rejected by them." So it's clear that Vladimir Putin did his homework, and he came prepared for this interview. Therefore, he was able to control the direction of the interview and prevent Tucker Carlson from getting legitimate, genuine responses from him, except for perhaps the one on AI. He did say that he doesn't remember exactly when he last spoke with President Biden, though he did say it was not since the start of the war. Tucker Carlson, for his part, while his interview skills are certainly in use there, and he did a decent job, what he did not bring was, as I call them, receipts. He did not say to Vladimir Putin, "You said this on September 5th, 2021, or whatever it is." I don't remember the exact dates, but like one of the things he said back in, I think it was 2008 timeframe, that Crimea was part of Ukraine. There was no intention for them to attack that area or take it over. And they had no design on the borders of Ukraine. And Tucker Carlson didn't bring any of that to the game. He did not challenge him on his prior statements at all throughout, which I found to be a bit disappointing considering Tucker Carlson's reputation as a hard-charging interviewer. Vladimir Putin did at one point in time say, "Is there not anything better for the United States to do than to support Ukraine?" Then he talked about the border situation. He talked about the politics. And while it seemed he was well informed, I had the gut feeling that he was spouting his own information operations, the exact things that the Russian troll farms are talking about to the Western audiences, trying to basically plant those same narratives in the middle of this interview. So let's go ahead and continue on with the Institute for the Study of War, and we'll see what they say about this as well. Putin also attempted to use the interview to absurdly reframe Russia as the wronged party and not the initiator of Russia's unprovoked war of conquest against Ukraine. He claimed that Ukrainian neo-Nazis started the war in Ukraine in 2014, and that this full-scale invasion, actually, I listened to this part, he said he didn't invade until the Ukrainians started using aviation to bomb civilians in the Donbass area. What he didn't point out is that just a month before, the Ukrainians used aviation to attack Russian formations in Donbass was the fact that Russian forces had actually started the conflict a month before that happened. Very much, he spun his history, and the question is going to always be, will people do their homework. And I regret to say this, but I think that's why we are going to find that, like President Roosevelt said, that while Americans are not easily duped, he said, not yet easily duped. And I think that's why we're going to find that to be the case. He tried to justify the invasions of Ukraine as responses to Ukraine's and the West's actions. He also continued to propagate this pseudo-history in an effort to deny that Ukraine even exists as a state and a nation. And he did. He went back to the 800s, not the 1800s, but the 800s, and told quite the tale of history that is obviously, and I'm going to state it this way, obviously interpreted most generously to Russia. So that's the situation you're looking at, and that is a significant interpretation. While history is open to much interpretation, I believe that you're going to find that when you're doing it for this type of purpose, that it becomes propaganda and not just history. He also talked about having a quasi-realist worldview that defines weakening the West and dismantling NATO as prerequisites for the Russian-led multipolar world he desires to create. So he says that he has no beef with NATO. He has nothing that he wants to do to NATO countries. But NATO needs to go away so that we can actually have this new multipolar world where Russia is the big cheese, the one that's the most important. Something he seems to forget when he says those things is that he's right next door to China. 1.5 billion people, I believe, over in China right now. Yeah, that's if it's not the U.S., that's the big dog. It's going to be China, and Russia will be a Chinese vassal state. The rest of this is talking about other things going on, but that's the Institute for the Study of War. The Kyiv Independent said that Putin began his interview by delivering a long history lesson promoting false claims about Ukraine's sovereignty and providing skewed historic interpretations on Ukrainian statehood. The best interview I've ever seen, said Russian propaganda sources or Russian TV outlets. The screenshots of the series are kind of showing a lot of the things going on. But overall, it's clear that the Russian state TV has gotten their marching orders, that this is going to be the most positive view of Tucker Carlson, and more particularly in Vladimir Putin's conversation with him. One of the claims that Vladimir Putin made was that Ukrainian President Zelensky's father, now let's just read it to you here. Putin said that he once talked to Zelensky and asked him, "What are you doing? Why do you support neo-Nazis in Ukraine today when your father fought against fascism? He is a frontline soldier." And he says he's not going to repeat the answer he got. The problem was that Volodymyr Zelensky's father was born in 1947, a full year to two after the end of World War II. Over here in the West, there's been a lot of conversation about this interview, but in the end, Tucker Carlson was hoping to come away with a big interview coup, something that would really be that red meat that his audience could really dig into. And what he walked away with was a Russia-focused lecture on history, and did not end up. He even tried to sprinkle in opportunities for Vladimir Putin to say some of the things that would really fire up Tucker Carlson's audience. And he very much didn't use those opportunities, which tells me that really the interview was more for his domestic audience than a Western one. He's trying to shore up his bona fides with his own people at this point in time, right before the presidential election. And I believe this was a major part of it, with Tucker Carlson being so popular over in Russia. Crimean Winds actually pointed out the same thing I mentioned earlier, that the Poles forced Hitler to attack them in 1939. Poor good Hitler didn't want to, but was forced to start World War II. And I've seen other sources point out this means that Vladimir Putin is actually guilty of one of his own laws, specifically the rehabilitation of Nazism. The Washington Post said that Putin barely allowed Carlson to get a word in. There's truth to that. The journalist himself admitted that an interview with the dictator who has been dodging inconvenient questions for 24 years is fraught with certain difficulties. I just hope Tucker Carlson didn't drink the tea. This was kind of funny. As the conversation was going on, you can see the look on Tucker Carlson's face. He always kind of has this look in many of these interviews, and he does this very well. But overall, you end up with a situation where Tucker Carlson actually looks a little confused. You can see him looking away for a moment, and he's like, he doesn't understand what's going on at some of these points. And that's because Carlson came for an adversarial interview. Putin came for a university lecture. He was not there to answer questions so much as to give his own words. A lot of thoughts on this. I don't need to go through all of this. We've already beaten a dead horse at this point. But overall, we've got a situation where, as Richard Hananiah says, it revealed how out of touch Putin is. Tucker began with a simple question of what the threat was on February 22nd, the one that started the war, and Putin spent half an hour on effectively ancient history. Now, I'm going to go ahead and pull up Robbie Russell's information here so I can get that up in front of me. See, not that one. Not that one. There we go. Sorry, I did a few changes on my setup over here to try and get things a little bit smoother. It's not necessarily always a smooth deal. Robbie Russell, a good friend of the channel and a friend of mine, stated that he'd actually watched most of the interview, and he sent me an email on his reaction. And about 35 minutes in, he says that the misinformation portion of the speech started. He spoke about how the special military operation was carried out by Ukraine itself and its own territories, and that Ukraine had aircraft that were killing civilians, so he had to step in those areas and protect the Russian speakers and his assets in the Black Sea. And then I wanted to point out what Robbie Russell here says, and I do appreciate this paragraph in particular. The unfortunate thing is a lot of people, as in Americans, aren't going to do their research or forgot what Putin said originally and take this as what actually happened. I don't even want to get started on the Maidan situation that he described very inaccurately. And that's kind of the overall situation there. By the way, Robbie, thank you for that email. I do appreciate your analysis. It's very much appreciated. But that's the situation with the Tucker Carlson interview of Vladimir Putin. He spent a long time spouting ancient history that, in theory, should have no bearing on our modern age. He tried to claim a historical claim on those territories, said claim having been renounced when the Soviet Union fell in 1991. He did spend a lot of time claiming that Russia was the victim of Western aggression, being prevented from doing all these things. And therefore, it is, in fact, the West's fault that Russia is doing these things. They're not expansionist. They're just reclaiming what the West has denied them. So, if you get the chance and you do watch the interview, absolutely let me know what you think and your thoughts on what you see. The researching all these things in detail would require a month of just steady plugging to go back to find out the history from 862 AD or whatever it was, and run it forward through 1,200 years of history. And probably you'd need a Russian history professor to guide you through it. But in the end, how the modern world has turned out is not governed by how things happened 1,200 years ago. Moving on to an interesting publication from the Institute for the Study of War, a fact sheet on U.S. assistance to Ukraine. And they go through several of the most common claims, and they have a large amount of information on this. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and do this for everybody here. This is the link to the document I'm looking at right now. I put that in the comments. And they go through the information on U.S. assistance to Ukraine. The claim, like the U.S. aid to Ukraine, lacks oversight and is being misused because of corruption in Ukraine. Whereas the fact is that U.S. oversight is extensive, and the Ukrainian government oversight and accountability are extensive and growing. Many people like to point to the $40 million that were misappropriated. Ukraine is the one that found that and reported it, recovered the funds, and put the people in jail. But the one side is like, oh, see, this is corruption going on. Well, if you're going to tell me there's no corruption in the United States, I've got a bridge over in Brooklyn and a bridge over in San Francisco that I'd love to sell you. But they go through each of these claims and kind of give you the rundown of the actual facts on all of them. So be sure to check out that fact sheet there. Douglas says, besides Putin's take, he also seems out of touch with China economy and population decline. That was just a short comment, though. That's true. He did mention China, and he mentioned them having 1.5 billion people. What he neglected to mention is that in about 10 to 15 years, India is going to overtake them. China's population is in decline. That's from years of deliberate policy trying to keep their population in check. So, absolutely. And there are aspects of that whole situation where we all have to sit here and think, and it's nuanced. We'll put it that way. Thank you, Douglas. Let's go ahead and move on to the situation with General Zahluzny. And the real short summary here is that General Zahluzny was, in fact, not fired. Fired's not the right word. He was dismissed from his current post. He was asked if he would stay on for other things as well, and we have not yet determined what those other things are. This is after a couple of weeks of the rumors abounding that Zelensky was planning to fire Zahluzny. Of course, all those rumors were hyped up in ways that was like, it's going to be this horrible, he's going to deliberately fire the guy, he's going to sack him, and it's going to be this political nightmare, and it's going to be awful for the military. Zelensky is trying to do this the right way. Zahluzny has gone 2 years at the head of all military operations. He's tired. He needs a break. And he has staff and underlings that will be able to take this to the next level, at least for this point in time. And I don't believe that we've seen the last of Zahluzny. If he's not doing active things for the Ukrainian military, which I fully expect him to do, and there's speculation on that I'll talk about in a bit here, he will absolutely be on high demand on the world stage to talk about modern warfare in an asymmetric environment such as Ukraine versus Russia. He was replaced by General Syrskyi, his second in command. Syrskyi, actually, there's been a lot of negative comments about Syrskyi in general. However, he actually was, I believe, successful at the initial defense of Kyiv and had several good wins under his belt. That said, the complaints are that he typically thinks in the Russian doctrine rather than necessarily Western doctrine. I don't know that that's necessarily true. He's got some big shoes to fill, but he's also got a big to-do list to take care of as well. However, President Zelensky didn't leave it well enough alone. He went ahead and conferred the Hero of Ukraine Award to former Commander-in-Chief Valery Zahluzny on February 8th. So he says that reward is for distinguished personal merits in the protection of state sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and selfless service to the Ukrainian people. I don't think there's anybody who doubts one whit those are accurate statements about Zahluzny. There were some variety of comments about this. Some people tried to pull historic parallels. I think the biggest parallel is that most of the commanders in World War II didn't spend that long in such broad operational control at all levels. Zahluzny was involved from everything from tactical to operational to strategic levels. Maybe he just has a problem with, delegation in that regard. But he had everything on the line. World War II generals, there was an entire set of boffins back in the U.S. that were providing material and equipment that would make it so that for these generals to work with. They had an entire logistic chain that these generals didn't have to worry about except to make sure it was protected. They had to worry about their situation on the battlefield and some political around it, but they did not have to worry about so much that Zahluzny has had to deal with throughout this war. More photos from the ceremony of the Heroes of Ukraine. Budanov also received a similar award, the Hero of Ukraine award. And I'll be honest, Budanov is not a surprise from my perspective. I'm surprised his position didn't change just yet. He's been very effective, though, as intelligence director. That's just an interesting ad. This is the moment that I better mute this because I don't know what the music is going to be. The moment that Zahluzny and Zelensky had passed over that award. Tell me those two are truly at each other's throats, which is what people keep saying. I would say these men had a working relationship, one that was probably fraught with pitfalls and problems and arguments, but productive nonetheless. Of course, that's just my external view on the situation. Here are Syrski's new tasks that he has to get started in on. He needs to provide a clear and detailed planning of actions for all military management bodies, association units, and parts, taking into account the front line's needs for the latest models of weapons supplied by international partners. The main task of military logistics remains the fastest and most rational distribution of supplies necessary for combat operations, to know all the needs of the front and to be aware of the situation in every sector. The life and health of servicemen are the main values of the Army. Maintaining a balance between performing combat missions and restoring units and subunits with intensified education and training of personnel remains as important as ever. The introduction of new technical solutions and scaling up successful experiences, such as the use of unmanned systems and modern electronic warfare. Interestingly enough, a lot of this is basically he needs to carry on the war with not just resources. See, so many nations sent such a hodgepodge of equipment. His task is now to make it so that all of that makes sense in a logistics format, that his soldiers can be rotated and receive the necessary training, education, and rest they need. He's got to advance their technical capabilities in the middle of a war. He's got a big set of boots to fill. Here's Budanov in his fancy uniforms, Class A's, we'd call him. But, he was awarded that new Hero of Ukraine title, and I think it's well-deserved. Another one talking about the same material there, so let's go ahead and move on. Alexander Pavlik has become the new commander of the ground forces of Ukrainian armed forces, replacing Syrsky, who's come up from that position. Anatoly Barhilovich, there we go, is expected to be appointed as the head of the general staff of the armed forces. So we're waiting on some of those to happen, but that looks like the situation there. We've got some new leadership in place. That's part of the old leadership, and it'll be interesting to see if anything changes. There's a lot of back and forth on this one. Some people are like, this is the end of the world as we know it. Others are, let's give it some time and see what happens. I am cautiously optimistic. Moving on, I'm going to briefly talk about U.S. politics. The Senate did pass a vote, 67 to 38. 67, that doesn't feel right. 67 to 32, there we go. 67 to 32 to end cloture on the new Ukraine-Taiwan Israel aid package. Now, they've stripped out the border provisions from it. This is just an aid package for those countries. So they're separating it out again and moving forward. The ending of cloture means that they have basically moved it onto the floor, and it can go for a full vote. I saw something saying it was already passed, but I believe that was somebody, a foreign source, misinterpreting the situation. The Senate, the Senate now needs to pass it and get it moved over to the House. I'm going to take a brief pause here for just a moment and get a drink of water. And while I'm doing that, absolutely let me know if you have any comments. I'm kind of shotgunning a lot of material at you in a hurry. So thank you very much for your patience and for working with me here. All right, I'm back. Thank you very much for your patience on that. Let's go ahead and move on to the situation in Ukraine. There's not a lot, so I'll just flow right into Russia after that and just let you know when I get to that crossover point. Alexander Porkin has been appointed as the acting Veteran Affairs Minister. That was after the resignation of Yulia Lapatina, who was the minister until February 9th. Ukraine's SBU has uncovered 3 caches of Russian weapons. They were hidden in various places, I believe Bucha District, Kiev, Vinnytsia, and Zakarpattia Oblasts, with, like, for instance, an arsenal of grenade launchers, 15 kilograms of explosives with detonators, and automatic weapons. It's believed these caches were placed by pro-Russian militant groups who left them behind for sabotage groups to use. So interesting to see it happen. There was the one over in Bucha District. Another one, a man hit an arsenal of munitions near a local quarry. There was also one who was left with a man who's convicted of arms trafficking. So voila on that. Another 100 prisoners of war have been exchanged. And these are the people that have managed to make it home. Lots of them. Some pictures here just to show the emotions of these people as they finally have managed to return home. So more have made it back to Ukraine. We'll move on to the news out of Russia here. From the Defense Intelligence of the UK, an intelligence update. On the 7th of February 2024, social media posts highlighted an explosion at a Russian missile factory close to Izvest. That factory is used to produce a range of ballistic missiles, including the Iskander, which is regularly used against Ukraine. The Russians have been very vague about exactly what happened. Initially, they was said it was worker error. Later, it was said it was a planned test of rocket engines. And they don't believe that Ukrainian drones were involved in this situation. But that is 5 industrial facility explosions in 4 months. That includes the Kaminsky chemical plant in Rostov, the Chelyabinsk tank factory, the gunpowder and ammunition factories in Kotovsk, and Solokamsk. It could be just negligent handling, and it could be perhaps trying to work harder and faster to meet their production output quotas that have caused, basically, they're people too tired to do the work. Increased demands on production will likely result in greater numbers of industrial accidents in the future, says the Defense Intelligence Update. A fire was reported at an oil refinery in Russia's Krasnodar Krai. I believe that was another drone attack from everything we'd understood. They said it was put out within an hour. And a gas pipeline broke near the village of Kuyida in Perm Krai, Russia, injuring 6 people. It's interesting, and I'm wondering if that might be another drone attack or some other partisan action there. Well, actually, this happened about the time that Tucker Carlson was getting ready to leave the Kremlin. A residential building caught fire, and 400 people were forced to be evacuated. They brought in, I believe it was 55 fire vehicles. Might have been 45. I'm just going from memory on that number. But the fire was looking like it might spread. Later reports indicate it might have been just a short in the heating system to prevent ice from building up on the roof. Don't know. There is 41 units of equipment were involved in the fire extinguishing effort, including 2 helicopters. More on the Perm region pipeline. This was the part that I didn't see in any other sources. It came from Astra here. That pipeline that exploded in Perm, there was also a freight train caught in the explosion. So, and also some residential buildings. So interesting. I don't know that we know anything additional on it, but that's quite the fire there. Of course, it's being fed with gas. More information on the explosions here is Vesk. Things are a little bit unorganized today, so I do apologize for that. I just kind of got things together in the last little while here, and so I was trying to watch the interview as well, so I'd kind of be current on everything going on. The explosion over there, right after that explosion happened, all the residents bought up all the potassium iodide they could find. That's what they would use to protect against the release of radioactive substances, which may mean the locals know something that they're not telling the rest of the world. More on the Krasnodar Krasnodar oil refinery there. Get a video of it going up in flames. This one doesn't surprise me now that I think about it. According to reports, Russians are deploying Starlink terminals to the occupied territories. This is being done by bringing those terminals through, I believe it's Serbia or another country, getting them activated there and then just bringing them into the occupied territories and using them in violation of sanctions. And that will be, of course, a clear national security risk. The Russians seem to think that they can say whatever they want these days. They have claimed that they will not interfere in the American presidential election, but they expect the United States to interfere in the Russian presidential election. Not sure why they'd think that, considering they've already got it in the bag. Interesting story here. 21 soldiers from the Russian 155th Marine Brigade have refused to follow orders and lock themselves up in a building in occupied Donetsk. They say they don't consider us people. A barrier squad was put up, snipers who acted against us, their own. And they believe that they will face the firing squad. So we're starting to see situations where soldiers are no longer just accepting orders. It's a bad situation for any military to be in. We're going to move on to the international front in just a moment here. Let me go ahead and pop this on here. I'm going to grab another drink of water again. Go ahead and pipe up and let me know what your thoughts and comments are. I do want to know what you guys think about this news. If you see anything here and you want to kind of comment on it, your thoughts, or if you've seen more information, please let me know. All right, I am back. Thank you for bearing with me as I did that pause. Let's go ahead and move on to the international situation here. Boop. A bipartisan delegation of the U.S. Congress arrived today in Kyiv. It is headed by the leader of the Intelligence Committee and Republican congressman from Ohio, Mike Turner. Turner did release a statement on the situation, saying that he was confident the U.S. would provide support in the end and help out Ukraine. Norway plans to deliver additional NASAMS air defenses to Ukraine, 10 additional air defense launchers, and 4 fire control centers. Finland approved a new its 22nd defense aid package worth 190 million euros, according to the Finnish Defense Ministry. They don't remember what's in the package, but if I find it, I'll let you know. Polish farmers are back at it again. They are blocking 3 of the crossings on Ukraine's border. They say that there's not been enough done to prevent Ukrainian agricultural products from being dumped on their markets effectively. A Pentagon spokesman has hinted that U.S. air defenses continue to flow to Ukraine and says they are still flowing under the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. A Nordic-Baltic delegation visited the U.S. Congress to possibly shore up support for Ukraine. This was representatives from Estonia, Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, Latvia, and Lithuania. They're over there lobbying our congressmen to try and make sure that aid for Ukraine gets through. Armenia has put together 10 tons of medical equipment to send to Ukrainian military hospitals. Very nice of them to do so. Armenia's got a lot of things going on. That they'll take the time to do this is tremendous. Italy has approved a 1-year extension of military aid for Ukraine. And that was from the lower house of Italy's parliament, which gave that approval, and with that extension ready to go. I think there's more here, so I'm going to zoom this one back out a little bit so I can kind of scan below it. From Josep Borrell, the EU guy, he says, we need to explain to Europeans what it means to have the Russian army at the door. It is necessary to explain to European citizens before the June parliamentary elections what it would mean to see Ukraine defeated and the Russian army move to EU borders, said Josep Borrell, the EU's chief diplomat. Do you think that if Russia establishes a puppet regime in Ukraine, like the one they have in Belarus, and Russian troops are on the Polish border, will we get out of trouble, or will we have bigger problems? Robert Fico over in Slovakia has been, he's at it again. His government has eliminated the office of the anti-corruption prosecutor. That's the guy who basically investigates major crimes and corruption in the country. I thought Fico was one of those ones that had complained about corruption in Ukraine. Seems kind of odd to have Slovakia getting rid of their own guy who takes care of corruption in their country. Ecuador has tried to pull together all their Russian military scrap and send it to the United States to be passed on to Ukraine. Interesting. I don't know what Ecuador has for Russian military hardware. Be interesting to see if there's anything really exciting in it. Denmark's defense minister, Troels Lund Poulsen, warns of a heightened risk of NATO being attacked by Russia. Poulsen states that the situation has changed significantly, prompting the need for Denmark to be prepared for potential Russian aggression against NATO. As a response, he emphasizes the importance of advancing investments in defense capabilities to enhance readiness for the worst-case scenario. And this is the situation the Europeans have found. They have had peace on their continent for so long that they had stopped investing in their military. To be honest, if you look at U.S. military expenditures, it's down compared, if you actually account for inflation and the change of the value of the dollar, it's about 2.5 times smaller than it would be if we were talking 1980s dollars at the height of the Cold War. So even the U.S. is not investing as much money in their own military. And that's the international situation. Let's go ahead and move on to the front lines. There's quite a bit of small changes, but not many of them are good. So let's go ahead and get into this. I'm going to back up to yesterday because this update happened late enough I didn't catch it. We'll start with the deep state map. Avdiivka is, of course, getting to be more tenuous as we go. Come on, get that out of the way. This is yesterday's lines. Here's today's lines. You can see that the Russians are starting to cut off supply lines in this area. It's tough. It's really tough out there. there was a change. Apparently, I can't really click that X today. Southwest of Marinka, the Russians continue to advance slowly but surely. And just to the northwest of Marinka, they've gotten closer to Hirivka. So it's steady progress on the Russian side. The lack of materiel for the Ukrainian military is starting to be really felt on these front lines. Conversely, compared to yesterday's lines, the Ukrainians pushed the Russians back from Novomikhailivka. And it looks like they might be back into the outskirts here. I've got a few more updates on that in a bit, but that's that update there. Let's go ahead and move over to today's information. You can see already Novomikhailivka, they've re-updated to show the Russians back into the outskirts of the town there. Outside of Chasiv Yar, it looks like Russia's taken quite a bit of mostly open territory. Tree lines and stands of trees are relatively easy for Russia to capture and hold, though. Stepova is an area, of course, it's right north of Avdiivka. That means the Russians are active there again, and just to the north of it. This whole situation over here in Avdiivka is looking really, really bad. East of Klishchiivka, this area has been going back and forth for the last couple of days, so I'm not surprised to see another change. It's just, I wonder how much of this is actual changes and just now they're learning what's been going on. We already talked about Novomikhailivka as well. So that's the overall situation on the front lines. There were no changes near Robotna or Krinky, at least as of this moment. So let's go ahead and go through the rest of the detailed updates. Avdiivka mayor confirms Russian incursion into the city outskirts. It's, like I said, getting tense over there in Avdiivka. The situation in Avdiivka has deteriorated, according to Knoll reports. On the eastern flanks, Ukrainian forces have failed to push back Russian forces, while the latter has taken further control of the area east of the coke plant and is pushing into the private sector southward. And, of course, there's the private sector southward. This was today's update here. So Russians have managed to make additional progress here. Novomikhailivka, I already mentioned that it's been going back and forth. And the Kremina area is kind of weird. Let me go to the main deep state map again. That's this area right about here. And we're getting in here, this area right here, just kind of give you some context. And Ukraine is actually advancing in this area. This is territory that Russia's basically been hitting with all kinds of airburst weaponry to knock out trees, and it's a nasty bit of fighting. But it looks like the Ukrainians have managed to get a little bit of an upper hand in some of this area and approached the in that forest area. The Russians did also manage to advance a little bit as well. A lot of territory changing hands. And that's the situation on the front lines. Let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and flip this over here. And we'll talk about the extras in just a moment here while I get my screen cleaned up. Absolutely pipe up and let me know if everything's going well. And I will just go ahead and say right now, if you're still here and you're enjoying the update, despite the negative news and everything, but if you like my presentation of the news here, hit me with that thumbs up and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure I'll say it again at the end, but never hurts to say it now. All right, I kind of got things cleaned up, and I don't have much in the extras department here, so we'll end off with something just a little bit cute. Here's a child here, toddler, saw the dog sleeping and realized the dog could use a pillow. So she made sure the dog got a pillow, got a kiss, and a little bit of a pet. And that's everything for today. Thank you for joining me. Absolutely leave your comments in the comments and questions below. I will be watching for them, and I do appreciate every single one. I've already asked you to like, but if you have not yet subscribed, absolutely subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of the material I put out on the Ukraine war or on U.S. politics. There's a lot going on in the world today, and it's best we keep as informed as we can about everything we can, so we can make the good choices and be able to overcome the misinformation and disinformation that is out there. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.